the prayer given to us humans by Jesus himself. For many people, the Lord's Prayer is just a prayer to recite, but as we discover and explore this prayer, we can find this model prayer to be a life-changing experience. We usually say this prayer word for word when we're together at church, but prayer is personal and should have certain elements. The Bible verses for today are taken from Matthew chapter 6, verse 9 to 15. After this manner, therefore pray ye, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The first element of prayer is praise. What's absolutely unique about this prayer is that it begins simply with the address, Our Father, nothing else. Nothing more elaborate, nothing more grand, just that address as to the Father of the family. In this clause, Jesus establishes once and for all that the relationship between God and man is that of Father and Son. God is a merciful Father of humanity, eliminating the belief of the old theology of a vengeful and punishing God. By saying Our Father, we are revealing the fact of the brotherhood of men. This dissipates the illusion that men of a particular race, nation, or colour to be superior to others. And when pronounced in this prayer, not only are we praying for ourselves, but for the rest of humanity. We are truly members of just one body. Jesus says that the nature of God is hallowed, which also means holy. In this manner, God's nature is revealed to us as perfect and eternally good, and that's why we give him the praise. Verse 10, Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The second element is hope. We expect that God will act to change our lives now, and that Jesus will return to earth in person soon. We should submit our lives to God in prayer and live it out daily. We should be willing to put our concerns aside for the greater good of God's kingdom on earth. As we grow in prayer, we discover that prayer is more than simply asking God for things, but to put selfish means to an end. Prayer is not an attempt to force the hand of God, but an act of submission to him, with the understanding that God's answers are wiser than our prayers. Verse 11, Give us this day our daily bread. The third element is to depend. Jesus wants us to depend on God for our every need. In prayer, we rely on God. Prayer is our steering wheel and not our spare tire. Those who don't pray are trusting in their own limited resources. We should not worry about our problems because God is an abundant provider. He wants us to look to him in faith for our needs. He doesn't want his children to be worried and afraid, but to be at peace and to trust in God. Verse 12, And forgive us our debt as we forgive our debtors. The fourth element is to forgive. This line, in some ways, can be the hardest bit of the Lord's Prayer, because it tells us straight away that to pray is to be willing to change. And it takes a lot of nerve to come before God and say, Forgive me because I've forgiven someone else. And I don't always feel I'm really up to making that kind of claim on God. But I think it's saying that it's through God's forgiveness of us that we learn how to forgive. And it's in our capacity to forgive that we show we've been forgiven. It reminds us that our own ability to forgive comes from the fact that we're aware of God's forgiveness of us, and that unless that really sinks in, then we shan't be able to forgive. Jesus tells us that very powerful story about the king's servant who was let off his debt and then goes straight off and puts another servant in prison because he owes him a small amount of money. And he underlines the point that unless you forgive, you can't receive forgiveness. You've just made yourself incapable of receiving forgiveness. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. If I don't forgive, I can't be forgiven. But there's a wonderful image about this that brightens up the picture. It says it's a bit like teaching a child to do something. The parent does it carefully a few times, then steps back and says to the child, Now you show me. God, being the parent, forgives us and steps back and says, Now you show me how to forgive. Verse 13, And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The fifth element is goodness. Jesus wants our prayer to strengthen our desire to do what is right. God does not intend for us to do wrong. He wants us to avoid everything that is bad and evil. While God does not tempt us, he does watch us how we do under adverse conditions. This particular line is a prayer that he will protect us from our own bodies. There is another translation that uses the phrase, save us from the time of trial. Temptations are a form of trial. Just as Jesus was in the desert for 40 days and nights going through trials and temptations. As always, God was in control, but the evil one was doing the tempting. God knew Jesus would pass. The same goes for his children. There is no trial beyond our ability to handle with God's help. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. God is nothing else. God and nothing else is the only power. He is all life, truth, and love, over all people and things, and is the only all. Jesus recognizes that all authority and power rests with God. God is in control. Those devoted to prayer do things by prayer when they begin with prayer, not tacking prayer on as an afterthought after decisions are made. When faced with a challenge, the first thing is to go into prayer and not action. Those devoted to prayer give priority to prayer and are never too busy to pray. Prayer is not a special gift for a select few. All who have trusted in Jesus for salvation can pray as he taught. True prayer will not be achieved by human effort. It is a gift from God. Prayer is grace. If we are followers of Christ and we want to learn how to pray, he stands ready to teach us. Could we all please stand? Now let's bow our heads and practice what we have learned as we say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father,